Great. So I think we'll get started. Just want to start by welcoming everyone to this webinar. So this is the first in a series of webinars that we're running to shine a light on how ESOS is changing, how the ambitions are changing over time, how the requirements are changing over time. And then more importantly, we're looking to highlight what's on the horizon and explore how aligning your ESOS strategy with your operational and strategic net zero goals and how it can future-proof your business and ultimately see it as a value driver. So the first of this series, so the session today, is going to have a slightly more regulatory focus than the rest of the webinars. One of the reasons for this is we're soon to have the kind of portal open, so there's going to be kind of a regulatory activity happening any day now, but also to give us the foundations of what the regulations are and why, so then we can build upon them in the following webinar series. So if we go on to the next slide, actually, so if you can just take us back, I'll run you through what our plan is for today, or for the webinar series. And we have built the series based on what we understand the gaps and knowledges are, based on the pathway for ESOS, and where we feel there is information there that we can share that will help people with their ESOS and decarbonisation journeys. But ultimately, we do want to start building up a community around this. So what we do want to do is hear from you as to what content we can share that's going to help you. So the plan we've got in place is building a business case for decarbonisation and how to do that. Looking at management's a bit of a deep dive there. What are they? Do you need one? And then also have a webinar really digging into net zero. When's a good time to start thinking about it, and then how to best plan for your transition. So with that in mind, we're going to open up a poll. And we would just like a quick moment from you guys, if you wouldn't mind, as to which ESOS related topics you want to hear more about. If you can just tick as many as you want. If it's already in the webinar series, that's great. We can just make sure we focus on it more. If there's anything else not on this list, actually, just ping us over a message, which will have our contact details later. This really is a flexible program to meet what you guys need. Just give you all a few more seconds. Okay, great. Let's move on then. So our agenda for today. So we're going to start with an ESOS refresher, looking at what the regulations are, what the thresholds are, etc. We're going to look at the journey we've come on to date with ESOS. And then the nuggets here really are the common challenges that we've seen across businesses and solutions or recommendations to build and improve upon those challenges. We're then going to start looking what's coming ahead with ESOS. So what's on the horizon for this current phase that we're in, what's been committed, what's still up for debate, and what's been positioned for the next round of ESOS as well. And then we're going to end on some focus areas, so some really actionable insights that we think you guys can be focusing on over this next year and ahead, that's really going to help you get on the front foot with ESOS, but also how you deal with that in terms of your decarbonisation journey and adding value back to your business. And then we will save some time at the end for Q&A as well, for any questions you guys have for us. So today's speakers, so I'm Jacqueline. I am at Aclara as the principal consultant here. You're also going to be hearing from Sunil, who's our managing director, and also from Gus, who's an analyst here at Aclara. And for those on the call that are part of our kind of compliance support plan, I'm sure you've been working with Gus very closely as well. So you'll be hearing from us all today. A bit about why we've put together this content for you guys. So we've been working in the built environment for the past 12 years with helping a lot of organisations with ESOS, but their wider decarbonisation plans. In that time, we've helped over 35 organisations with ESOS, and over a third of them, well, about a third of them, we help with their wider compliance submissions as well. And through that time, we've got a database of over 200 sized energy and efficiency decarbonisation recommendations across building types. So we've got a lot of knowledge here that we wanted to share with the wider community that really helps you guys with your ESOS journey and adding value back to your business. So yeah, that's why we've put these sessions together. We can skip over a few things that we're proud of, but we can skip over that one. Great, so I'm going to hand over to Sunil.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Jacqueline. So I'll give you a quick overview of the journey that we've taken to develop ESOS and its development over the last 10 years or so, and then some of the lessons learned that's come through from the 35 plus assessments that we've done for phase 3, but then also look at some of the phases 1 and 2 linked learnings as well that's come from that. So the ESOS regulations came from the EU Energy Efficiency Directive that came in place in 2012. And the driving force behind that was to look at the energy performance of existing buildings. That arose from a recognition and understanding that existing buildings and the energy consumption was deemed a high risk by the European Union in terms of being able to meet up with some of the forward carbon and infrastructure challenges that were taking place. And that, as an activity and an issue, hasn't changed. So buildings are still seen as being one of the highest risks in terms of meeting up with the net zero targets, but also the energy supply and the infrastructure demands which are there. So the regulations have developed over time, and they have moved further from looking at a data-led approach to now how we action upon that data. And it will continue to progress into the future as we look at more of reduction of energy consumption, which comes out from the ED and the ESOS regulations itself. So its focus is on energy as opposed to carbon itself. Yeah, next slide. So the development activities that we've seen most recently for ESOS into phase 3 has included a reduction from a 10% down to 5% in terms of the scope that has to be audited. It means more activities are now in scope, and we have much less that can go within the de minimis criteria. We've also introduced in phase 3 up until 2027 is the action plans and annual progress. And again, that's its movement to take it away from just the data elements into how are we implementing the requirements, but also how does government utilise that knowledge and data as well, so we can start to understand about some of the standard measures, and UK PLC can also gear up around it as well. Yeah. So the timeline that's taken us out towards 5th of December 2027 is the when ESOS phase 4 is due to be submitted. That in itself will require a little bit more detail, and we'll come on to that in some following slides. But there's a timeline and a trajectory that takes us from phase 3 and completion, the implementation of initiatives and programs that have been documented within the progress reports, and then into the phase 4. That provides some consistency around the identification of initiatives and which ones of those have been submitted, but also the level of expectations that is set out into the future as well. So if lots of initiatives have been put in place, many of them been implemented, there's a good story to tell, and communication is part of the phase 4 and the implementation following on from that. If nothing's been implemented at all, part of that dialogue has to go into the phase 4 submission itself. So a lot of what we're doing now is starting to gear up towards that phase 4 submission. And then we have dialogue and details that are starting to take place into what goes into phase 5 and the reporting, and even beyond that as well. So, looking at the lessons learned that's come through from the phase three assessments, really focuses around three key areas. And I'll come on to in following slides a little bit more detail about each of these three areas. But they really revolve around these three key areas. It's the regulatory complexity, the way that the UK has set up the regulations, the ESOS regulations, and its relationship with others. It's the data challenges, and partly again, it's down to portfolio stock of buildings that we have and how we utilize and capture the data itself as well. And then finally, it's also about the resource constraints. And as we've developed and as the ESOS criteria has moved on and requires movement into delivery, that's requiring much greater levels of involvement and engagement from the business in order to achieve those ambitions. So looking at the regulatory complexity parts in a bit more detail, um, there's some challenges that we've seen within the regulatory elements itself around a couple of key areas. One part has been looking at the scope of an organisation and what's brought into scope and how other business units might also be involved as part of the ESOS requirements and criteria. And that's particularly for either larger organizations, corporates, which have multiple business units and business activities and legal entity structures. And it can also affect some overseas organizations, so those based particularly in US or Europe, where they have a different business structure, but you may end up having two business entity structures within a country. And part of the UK requirements is as soon as one part goes beyond the threshold, then all of the regulatory bodies and legal entities within that country are also in scope. So it's about having an understanding of that wider business activity to understand the scope, and then a conversation about what's the best means and mechanisms to be able to implement. And certainly as we went through phase three and we got involved with organizations, we're starting to pick up where businesses weren't complying fully for all of their business activities and interests, and then working with them about how to define that as part of their organizational structure. We've also had some challenges in terms of data provision and how particularly some of the property activities are covered. So what's in scope when we deal with some of the service charge locations or leased buildings, and what data needs to be reported and what data sits outside of scope. So again, the guidance is there, but what we're starting to see is the interpretation is sometimes challenged as well. And certainly from our perspective, Gus will go into a little bit more detail about some of those areas as well. The overlapping regulations is an ongoing challenge and an issue. We have a suite of primary regulations, the ESOS regulations, the SECR regulations, which do sit hand in glove. And again, from an organisational governmental perspective, they are seen as being similar. Slight differences in terms of remit and scope of what they cover. SECR will look at carbon and energy, whereas ESOS only focuses upon energy. But there is a good overlap that exists between those two, but still some slight differences, which for those uninitiated can be seen as being over complexity. But from a regulatory perspective, there is a need for an understanding as to where that separation exists. So that's much more about how we record and log data and information and how that data gets used for the different reporting requirements. And another regulation which has a linkage as well with the ESOS is the energy performance certificates. That's for commercial buildings as well as for domestic properties which are leased and rented out. So they're provided at the sale point of a building or at the letting point of a building. Currently, they're available for 10 years, but the requirements here is a C rating on energy performance certificates by 2028 and a B rating by 2030. So those are the current thresholds. The EPC is very much driven by the efficacy of the run-ins and what goes on in the building, and it's based upon the regulated loads within those buildings. So that's those which form part of the main part of the building. It won't include things like communication cabinets or small data rooms. It doesn't include some of the kitchen facilities. Those are all deemed outside the scope of an EPC. But because we talk about the efficacy of the equipment that goes in, the lighting systems, etc., we don't necessarily talk about energy consumption. And we've seen many, many times before an EPC level increases and improves and goes up from a lower grade to a higher grade, but the energy performance of the building, the amount of energy consumed in that building, has also gone up as well. So it's not a straightforward conversation that a better and higher performing EPC equals more energy efficient building. Both of those two need to be looked at in tandem together, and to look at how they do align with each other. And given that we're only talking a few years away before the 2028 and the 2030 timelines, it also forms part of the conversations to be held as part of any lease renewal arrangements that do take place or do need to take place. Yeah. So data challenges as well is a challenge. The landlord's tenants issue has been around as long as I've been doing reporting on energy performance and energy data, which unfortunately now is getting towards 25 years. And we still have the same issues and challenges. One of the primary elements is about asking the landlord for the data and for accurate data for regulatory reporting purposes. We do have the ability of getting hold of additional data through things like submeters, and there is a requirement and a need for landlords to provide better quality data as part of the reporting mechanisms. So there are clauses which sits within the RIC guidance, which can be called out and used to help to encourage improved data quality. We did also see in many instances where there were meters that were in place within basement areas, but landlords weren't using that data as part of the reporting. So there may also be instances where data is available, but the landlord is choosing to use an apportion route because it's the simplest approach for them, as opposed to using the meter data that might be available. So those sorts of items to be able to look out for, to be able to ask if there is further information, but also forms as part of that building review to see what additional data sets are there. And there's also some real challenges with data, but from the perspective of the ESOS regulations, a need to improve the quality of that data, and that's particularly with the transport data. Looking at the data sets which comes through from expensed items, or also from fleet vehicles, the level of detail of consumption is sometimes it's sufficient for the financial purposes that we're dealing with, but not sufficient for ESOS. So that's going to be one of the early areas to look at, is how do we understand some of the transport data and then collect some further definition on that data set so that we can start to use it to be able to make decisions. And the quality of the transport data needs to be and should be at the same level that we have from the energy side of things, so that we're able to make those same levels of interventions and improvements as well. And then finally, we're also looking at the data collection process and how we get hold of data, plus also the estimation protocols that are being used. So the more that we can get accurate data and information, the more that we can have that on a month-by-month basis, the better the data set is for being able to perform analytics on it, understand profiles and trends, and then being able to provide the advice and the guidance from that. So again, there's an early stage building out towards phase 4, where we're looking at that data quality and looking at where we can improve that quality to be able to reduce the need for estimations. And the final part is around the resourcing that's available. And a lot of this has to do with both landlord activities and access to those, but also to engagement with the business overall. Now that we're entering into a phase where it's not just data and information provided into a portal and that doesn't go anywhere, there's just a simple spreadsheet that discusses whether you've submitted data or not. We're now going into an open portal where initiatives are being noted, the types of initiatives are being noted, and therefore there's much greater exposure and disclosure about what an organisation is doing and what its plans and intentions are. That now sits and needs to sit alongside the wider communication that takes place from an ESG perspective, where an organisation is talking about its net zero plans, where it's talking about its status of carbon reductions or accreditations that it has, because we now have multiple levels, and from a comms perspective, that all needs to marry up with a consistency in the storytelling. So there is a need for that board level sign off, but that sign off is also about the implementation plans that are taking place. And invariably, that's going to be talking about budgets that are going to be available year on year to meet up with the ambitions that the organisation has set. Those ambitions aren't just ESOS, they're the ambitions set in terms of the overarching targets and guidance which is in place. So part of the role that we've got leading up now and over the next few years is how do we have that conversation with the senior management team around communicating and selling ESOS and the wider sustainability benefits, and being able to use ESOS as a lever to be able to communicate the value that's being provided, the ability of being able to leverage off the successes that's coming through from implementing these initiatives, but also how that can shape some of the forward communications that goes into annual reports, sustainability reports, and so on. There's one other part which is around the submission portal itself and how that gets implemented. And because there's now access to the portal, there's a named individual. It's about making sure that we have more than one individual with access, more than one individual as a super user onto that platform. The risk is if the individual leaves, it's in the middle of a year, nobody notices until the next submission needs to be made. And then getting access back onto the portal again does take a lot of time and effort and working with the Environment Agency to be able to reset and restart access provision. The alternative is, and we provide service for many of our customers, is to have ourselves on the portal as well. For those, it's normally Gus who's sat there on the portal, and that then also allows us to ensure that there's consistency in availability on the portal, but we can also help you then with the direct submission as well. Okay, I'll hand over. So in terms of the overcoming these obstacles, there's 3 key areas and 3 key activities really to start to focus upon in the short term and to take us forward over the next few years. So certainly start early and plan ahead. A lot of what I've been saying is about preparing for what we'd like to be presenting in 2027 and then working our way backwards to what we need to be doing today and over the next year and 2 years to be able to set ourselves up in good measure for that phase 4 submission. That also means developing this into the business case, the engagement with the senior management team, and being able to talk about this not as ESOS in its own right, but as part of a lexicon of regulatory compliance activities and sustainability programs that are being implemented. And that also then means getting the right data quality to enable all of that to happen. So understanding from a material perspective, what's the data that we do need? And are there any gaps and interventions that do need to take place to improve the data quality where we know that we're going to need it. So it's very much a targeted intervention as opposed to all data must be improved. So focus upon the key areas, and then that then rolls itself up into the ability to provide the business case and plan ahead. Okay, I'll hand over now to Gus to take us through some of the future changes.
Yep, thank you very much, Sunil. So yeah, I'll be running through some of the ways that ESOS looks to change going forward over the next coming phases. And firstly, before that, it's important to look at the trends in the EU. So there's the Energy Efficiency Directive, which came from the EU Commission, that the ESOS originally came from before Brexit. And it's important to look what the changes that are happening with that, because the UK sustainability regulations often do mirror what's happening in the EU. And of course, the previous phases of ESOS have been very similar to the regulations laid out in the directive. So yes, in late 2023, a revised version of the directive was published, strengthening the EU's ambition on energy efficiency. In this revised version, the scoping of energy audit requirements was completely shifted away from financial KPIs such as headcount, turnover, and balance sheets, and instead was moved towards energy consumption, requiring entities with certain levels of consumption to undertake energy audits and publish action plans alongside them, or become certified to an energy management system such as ISO 50001, depending on the amount of energy they consume. So the higher levels consumers needed to be certified to an energy management system. The lower level consumers needed to perform energy audits and publish the action plans alongside them. With regards to ESOS, this change is yet to be discussed for the upcoming phases, but if it is to be implemented in phase 5 or onwards, it would require a quite large scoping exercise to be performed by participants, and of course, potentially would require certification to an energy management system instead of treating it as an alternative route of compliance. So then looking at ESOS more specifically, in July 2021, the Department for Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy consulted on proposals to strengthen the scheme, seeking feedback from consultants, ESOS participants, trade associations, lead assessors, professional bodies, and more on the best forward approaches to take with the scheme. Then in 2022, the government responded to this consultation, indicating what approaches they wanted to take forward with the changes and amendments to the scheme. Then in February 2025, an update from the Environment Agency was published, announcing and cementing the changes with this. And it's important to note, within this 2025 update, some of the changes within the consultation were confirmed, as some of them were postponed to future phases beyond phase 4. And some of the changes originally mentioned and intended to be taken forward within the consultation weren't mentioned within the update. So it remains to be seen what will happen with those. The consultation originally was taking place during the reporting period for phase 3. So it's very possible that over the next coming years, we get more updates to phase 4 and onwards. So the first of these changes, one that has been confirmed in the most recent update, is that some of the alternative compliance methods will be removed as viable options from phase 4 onwards. The main one being display energy certificates and Green Deal assessments, leaving only certification to ISO 50001 that covers at least part of your energy supplies, or undertaking ESOS compliant energy audits as your viable options going forward. And the impact that could have on you as a participant is that more people will be requiring energy auditors and certified ESOS lead assessors to be assisting them on their assessment processes. There's only a limited number of those within the UK, and more demand on them will potentially increase the cost of those audits, and also increase the need for your time to be flexible in booking them in, especially in the lead ups to the main submission deadlines. We work with a certified lead assessor for ESOS, and his time very much gets booked up more and more as the deadlines approach. So we'll need to account for that going forward. The second change that was confirmed in the most recent update is changes following on from the introduction of action plans and annual progress updates in phase 3. So the requirement is that from phase 4 onwards, participants will need to include progress against their action plan commitments within their main ESOS assessment. And where any of these action plan commitments have not been met, participants will be required to provide an explanation as to why. And this change kind of highlights the scheme shift away from a comply and forget approach that we kind of saw in phase 1 and 2, where you could do the assessment, submit it, forget about it for 4 years almost, and then do the same again. Whereas now the focus is certainly more on annual progress and tracking of how you're doing with the actions you said you will be implementing. Another of the changes mentioned within the consultation originally that actually was not mentioned to be confirmed nor postponed in the most recent update is changes to the scope of audit requirements for ESOS. So it was initially said that from phase 4 onwards, a requirement will be introduced that ESOS reports must use an existing energy auditing standard such as ISO 50002 or BS EN 16247. Before this, specific energy auditing methodologies weren't mandated. They were only provided as recommendations for participants to follow. On top of this, it was said that, again, from phase 4 onwards, the ESOS audits and reports must give explicit consideration to improved collection and monitoring of energy data, setting of controls, and appropriate staff training, both within the reports and within the audit recommendations. So while these changes have yet to be confirmed, if they were to be considered more over the next coming years, it would again have an impact in that the energy audits will become becoming more complex, and with that, the prices will increase, and so you should budget accordingly. Within the consultation, it was stated that in phase 4, the scheme would be refocused to cover both energy efficiency and net zero, whereas beforehand it was exclusively based on energy efficiency. And that at a minimum, net zero assessments would require confirmation that any ESOS recommendations are aligned to your net zero goals and should include recommendations that look to reduce GHG emissions, even where these do not currently generate a direct energy cost saving. Within the February 2025 update, the decision was made to postpone this element to phase 5 for the 2031 submissions. However, it is still available as an option for participants to voluntarily report on these net zero considerations within the upcoming phase 4 submissions, something which is well worthwhile to consider. Many organizations have kind of public-facing 2030 net zero targets, and the transition for that needs to be in motion and reportable, obviously by 2031 now for the phase 5 submission, but that will be after those public-facing targets have reached their deadline. So definitely worthwhile considering that voluntary reporting for the 2027 submission. Another of the postponed changes is the alignment of the ESOS qualification thresholds with the streamlined energy and carbon reporting regulations. This one has been postponed, not specifically to phase 5. It wasn't stated as to what phase it was postponed to, but the plan is still there for this to happen. Originally, the ESOS requirements thresholds, that qualify you for participating or not, that you either need to have 250 or more employees or a balance sheet of at least £38 million and a turnover of at least £44 million. If this threshold alignment was to happen, this would make it so that the thresholds are 2 or more of either 250 or more employees, a balance sheet of £18 million, or a turnover of £36 million. This would, in turn, pretty considerably increase the amount of organisations who are coming under the thresholds for ESOS, and that would, in turn, have a knock-on effect again, if that's compounded with the other changes I previously mentioned as well, the demand for the limited number of lead assessors will be only more increased, meaning, focusing on your budgeting going forward and your flexibility and planning for the scheme is very important. So I'm going to pass back over to Jacqueline, who will talk about what you should be focusing on going forward.
Hi guys, you've only got a few more slides from us before we open up to questions, and we have had some really good questions coming through. So if you do have any, pop them in now, and then we will cover them in a few minutes. So to finish off today, there's been a lot of information we know, but we did just want to make sure we kind of laid the foundation for what we're going to build upon over the next few webinars. But we realise there's a lot of information, so we did just want to close off with some really actionable things to think about going forward. And what we've done is we've grouped them into three main areas. So about embedding ESOS into your strategy, about planning for regulatory change, what you should be planning for up front, and then also some questions around kind of your data strategy and what investing in your data strategy is really about. Great. So what do we mean by embedding ESOS into your strategy? So sorry, the window open, as we said. So first off, it's really about understanding your decarbonisation case in the short, medium and longer term. So in the short term, this might be things like your business case for swapping out your lighting. Slightly kind of more into medium term, it might be looking at heat mapping. It might be about looking at how it relates to operational efficiencies, for example, on production lines, etc., other cost centres that you have. More medium term, it might be looking at your kind of travel and home working policies, but looking at this strategically to think about not just how it impacts, say, your energy, but then making sure you've got then time to think strategically about how it impacts well-being, etc. Through to longer term, more strategic decisions like climate, big capital expenditures, or what happens, for example, when your lease is coming up 5-10 years down the line, but building that into your strategy. So you're building that over time. As hopefully these examples highlight, it's also really important to make sure you are integrating your finance, your operations teams and your estates in the process. So quite often we see it as an estate-led process, which is fine for it to be led there, but it very much should be bringing in all of the functions within the organisation. One, to help you identify what these opportunities are, but two, to then make sure you are realising these opportunities year in, year out. And then lastly, ESOS, this activity that you guys are doing now is a really useful stepping stone into looking at climate risks as well. So when you come and look at climate risks, if you haven't already, do dig this out, and it should be part of your building blocks. So second area is planning for regulatory change and what you should be doing in this area. So a couple of specifics that we've pulled out is around really taking the time to assess your compliance route. So for example, ISO 50001, is it the right option for you? And doing that thinking far enough ahead of deadlines that if that is the route you want to go down, you've got time to implement it properly and efficiently, rather than timing having to make that decision for you, or that increased kind of rush and forgoing of quality that sometimes happens if you do kind of make these decisions a bit later on in the day. And another example here for the same reasons is think about your how you're going to submit if you've got a parent company with multiple subsidiaries, about kind of the aggregation or disaggregation. Again, making that decision up front means that you can align your data strategies with how you're going to actually submit, and give yourself time to plan accordingly. The other area is then taking advantage with crossovers and activities. So very much we've touched on this kind of throughout the presentation, but if you have to report SECR, align these two activities together, because a lot of the data in terms of energy collections and kind of scope 1, scope 2 are the same. Again, if you're reporting scope 1 and scope 2, you should only need to be collecting these data once, and making sure you are aligning these activities help in multiple ways. One, it makes it more efficient to be collecting the data, and two, you're making sure you're collecting and reporting on the same data rather than run the risk of reporting separate information or separate numbers that should be reporting the same thing. For example, if you're having operational conversations in the business already about cost savings, where does energy overlap with these conversations that are already happening? And then the same thing kind of with capital investment. If you are looking at capital investment for kind of plant for buildings, then having these conversations aligned with the ESOS conversations mean that you are looking at it in more angles. And again, you're only having these conversations once. Plan early. So as Gus said, the increase in costs or the potential increase in demand and cost because of the additional time needed for auditors mean that get your auditor in early. And then assess readiness against phase 4. So whether or not you are ready to be communicating voluntary net zero ambitions for phase 4, why not use it as a readiness assessment? So aim to meet it, and then as you get closer, use it as a gap analysis assessment to see whether or not you're ready to go public, or if you're not, you're then on the front foot when it comes to phase 5. And then lastly, before we kind of open the floor, next slide, thanks. The importance of investing in your data strategy. So we've kind of grouped this into 2 areas. So first of all, on the data quality and granularity, and again, we've touched a lot of this through the deck or through kind of the session today. But automate where you can, or standardize, and make sure that if you can't automate, that you are standardizing. So you are creating those templates year on year. That means you're speeding up the time to report, but also then you are getting consistent and comparable data. Collect and store site level data. So for example, if you are collecting data across multiple sites, how can you automate it? Or if you're not automating it and you can't, how can you standardize it to make sure that you're getting data that can easily be aggregated and disaggregated? And another option that is, if you are able to do it, for example, a sub-metering or EMS implementation where possible, and it will solve a lot of these issues for you as well in terms of standardization, optimization of some of the data. And then the processes, so streamlining the processes. So when often people think about sustainability regulations, they think, oh my God, additional data that we need to be doing on top of everything else. And we always suggest kind of taking a step back from this and looking at it in a slightly different way. So start with what's already being collected in your business and which already is usable. So for example, transport data is often, expenses, mileage data. You've got your utility bills that are already being tracked. Finance data, for example. Then when you've looked at what's already being used that you might be able to leverage, look at what's being reported that is similar to what you want, and then you may be able to adapt it. So for example, adding additional fields, etc., onto existing reports. And then only then, once you've gone through these steps, do you then think, actually, we do need a new data request and build on that. Hopefully that will help you streamline data. Again, make sure you're being consistent with what you're reporting, but also save you guys time as well. So I think that's everything for the deck. We'll run through next steps. So we've got our webinars coming up. So following this webinar, we will be updating you on the plans for the business case and for decarbonisation. And we'll let you know what your feedback has been through the poll and any feedback we get after this session on what you want the focus of these sessions to be, because as we said, ultimately these are for you guys and to give you guys the information that's going to be helpful. Imminently, so according to the Environmental Agency, mid-June, the portal is supposed to be opening, or was supposed to be opening, for the annual progress updates. So we're expecting it any day now. With a lot of you on the call already, Gus will have been in contact if he hasn't already, and you're kind of part of our compliance support plan. He'll be in touch with you very, very soon about getting ready for that. The earlier, the better. And then following this call, we'll just run on to the next slide. Following this call, for those of you that kind of are on our 3-year compliance plan, Gus will be reaching out to you. For those not, do reach out. We're happy to have a 30-minute call with you, whether or not it's on kind of ESOS or anything else that we've discussed today. We are happy to have a quick chat with you. So if you do have any questions, whether it's feedback, more you want to hear more about, or you do just have something you want us to help you kind of unpick with regards to your ESOS or further support, then reach out to me, and we'll follow up with our contact details after this. Yeah, so we kind of won't touch this, but yeah, the things that you can help with, yeah, so it's across, even it's a more broader question around kind of either your net zero or broader regulations, then do feel free to reach out. And then one other thing, don't forget to subscribe to our monthly ESG updates. It's a service that we offer for free that gives you monthly updates with what's happening in the world of sustainability regulations, and we track ESOS there as well. And if you're not already part of this service, do sign up and you'll hear from us on a monthly basis. And it's I think an invaluable tool for lots of people about just making sure that they know when the world of sustainability regulations is changing, because they do change a lot. Great, so we'll open up to the floor. So we've had some questions coming in, and I am going to be the facilitator on it, so that means I don't have to answer all the tough questions. So if I just have a look and okay. So the first question, which I'm going to hand over to Sunil, if that's okay with you. So it's a question on, so in reality, how many people are actually going to be reporting voluntary to the phase 4 aspect during phase 4, do you think?
Yeah. So this relates to the net zero aspirations. And I think, again, it falls a large part to how the organisation wants to communicate its overarching storytelling. So a lot of organisations have got net zero ambitions. They have stated targets, particularly on their scope 1 and 2 areas around reduction of energy, around decarbonisation. And so there is already a natural progression that's been happening over the years. So we can make use of the ESOS reporting to again have another place where you're able to communicate the progress that is being made, and another place where you're able to articulate the different sorts of measures that you are employing and implementing to meet up with those 4 targets. So I think I'd encourage organisations where those plans are in place or where they are nearly finalised to also be looking at that voluntary communication, because I think it's going to be of benefit for the business. For those that haven't developed any forward targets or any activities, I suspect many of those won't be reporting. But what it should be used as is a need for those conversations to take place, communication around what targets should we have, but also what's that disclosure strategy for that level of detail of the information.
Great, thanks, Sunil. So the next question, which I'm going to pass on to you, if that's okay, and then we've only got one more after that. So if anybody does have any more questions, do put them in the chat. So this one's about the risk of enforcement penalties. So how serious is the regulator about non-compliance? Is there risk of enforcement and penalties? I'll just come on mute.
Yeah, thank you, Jacqueline. So firstly, we're not the regulator, so we can't tell you whether or not you definitely will be penalised or not for a late or a improper submission. The guidance that has come from the regulator is that you can be fined for a late or an improper submission or not undertaking an energy audit when required to do so. The fines range depending on the infraction. I think between £5,000 and £50,000. And I believe there's an element of size of organisation as well. And important to remember that they can kind of compound, stack up, depending on the amount of infractions. There's further costs added on for the time taken to remedy the problems identified. And I think also important to remember is that the regulator themselves can change their stance on these punishments. So specifically for the action plans and progress updates element, originally in the phase 3 guidance, it said late submissions of them wouldn't be penalized in any way. It would just be published saying that you hadn't published an action plan. In a recent newsletter, that stance changed, and now it's up to the regulator's discretion whether late submissions for the action plans and progress updates can be penalised. And I think the final thing to remember is these these penalties and fines are also made public alongside the submissions being made public information. So phase 2, the list of companies who were penalised for these infractions was made public. We can expect the same to happen probably soon for phase 3, and then going forward for the other phases.
Well, thanks, Gus, and very well put. And just to reiterate, though, that we're not giving you kind of regulatory advice. We can just share what's happened so far and then the information that's been put out by environmental agency. So we have one more question. I think time for one more. So that works out well. And I'm going to send this over to you, Sunil. So it says, do you feel that the benefit of having ISO 50001 is being reduced? If so, is that expected to be reduced further in the future?
Yeah, thank you. Before I get on to that, just Rebecca, thank you for your feedback and comment there as well about the 90,000 fine that you were served, but that was due to an error by the Environment Agency. So I think that raises another important one, which is the Environment Agency themselves aren't infallible. So good record keeping and documentation, and not being afraid to go back to the Environment Agency saying it's not correct and here's the correct information, is also hugely important, because we've also been involved in a number of instances where there's been an incorrect response that's been provided, and then it's a dialogue to be able to resolve that as well. In terms of 50001 and how that's being developed and taken forwards, I think part of this is about the progression and development of the 50001 standard itself as well. It's still the 2018 version of the standard, and there's an expectation that there will be a major update to the standard, which will come out in a couple of years' time. So it may well be that this also aligns with the regular updates for the standard that's in play. But the other part of it is the 50001 system isn't just about compliance. It's also around how we get engagement and communication throughout the organisation, and how this aligns with the forward business strategy. And in that sense, a lot of what I was mentioning earlier on was about how does this form part of our storytelling? How do we get engagement at senior level? How do we get budgets in place and so on? And the 50001 provides a perfect mechanism for all of that to be put in place and to be structured into the medium term as well. So I think, yes, the elements of 50001 goes a long way to meeting up with the ESOS requirements and also the ED requirements. It may not do absolutely everything, but it does do the vast majority. But importantly, it's got so many other wider benefits for an organisation that helps you to achieve your goals and your ambitions outside of just ESOS itself.
Cool. Thanks, Sunil. So we haven't had any other questions coming in that time. So we'll give everyone 3 minutes back in their diary. If you do think of anything after you hang up, then yeah, do reach out, and we'll follow up with an email after this with what we presented today. So you've got that kind of in your inbox, and then you'll have our kind of contact details. I know a lot of you are already working with us, so yeah, obviously we're here available then. But yeah, for those of you that don't know us so well, you'll have our contact details to be able to reach out. Yeah, so yeah, we'll leave it there. Thanks everybody for joining, and have a good rest of the afternoon.